October again,
Yep.
and every year thereafter, because
A couple hours standing
some
up.
40, right,
Makes
because
your
some
brain work
40%
Yeah.
are just going to be
Well,
like,
and
well, no,
even
no.
the standing.
All right, I'm going to call this meeting to order. Has the meeting been properly noticed, Christina?
Yes, it has.
Thank you very much. And we'll move on to public comment. If there's anyone here in attendance who would like to provide public comment to the board, please feel free to approach the front of the auditorium and use the microphones and share with us your name and address. All right. I see no one here for public comment in person. And Dean, I'll look to you to confirm that we've not received any public comment via email.
I haven't. Tamara, did you?
Okay, great. We can move on to announcements. Any announcements from the board?
I will make one announcement. I just want to thank all the high school staff who are involved in some of the end of year wrap-up events, including prom, which is coming up this weekend. I know my daughter is quite excited about it, so just thankful for the effort and energy being put into that, and I hope it is a nice weather prom day. Let's hope.
Excellent, thank you very much. Other announcements from the board? Dean, any from you?
Yes, just briefly, Noah. So between yesterday and today, we vaccinated 774 people, mostly children, ages 12 to 15 plus 364 days. We took all comers, so we did some families, some college kids, but all total 774. The vast majority of them were for the Berlin Area School District. So I just want to shout out to Thad Shoemaker, at the owner of Fitchburg Family Pharmacy, and Daniel Ricky, his assistant there, for making this happen. So Daniel is on the logistics side, and Thad is just on the philanthropy side to make it happen. And we had nearly 50 staff members who volunteered between the 2 days to work either in the morning or afternoon, in some cases the entire day. And it was just a great success. The field house at the high school is the perfect place to do that. There was lots of room to spread out, and nobody got bunched up. And it was just a wonderful thing to see. So some people in here that volunteered to work: Angie, Dr. Hawkins, Dr. Durchie, Vicky, and Amy over there. So those were some of the and Rachel, some of the people that volunteered to work the clinic. So that was a great turnout, wonderful for our community, and bodes well for a great start for next fall.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing. Last call for any announcements. All right, hearing none, we can move to board business. We'll consider approval of the consent agenda. We have meeting minutes and personnel items. Any discussion on individual consent agenda items? Second call for any discussion. Last call. Hearing none, I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda. If there aren't any objections, this motion will be adopted. Are there any objections? Last call for any objections. Hearing none, the consent agenda is adopted. Our presentation from students in MSAN is going to be moved to our next meeting. So that brings us to item C, a review of the 2021-2022 preliminary budget.
And I think for this, Dr. Clardy is going to come down and lead us through this, along with Chad Weezy, our Assistant Superintendent for Business Services, and Pete Grender from our Finance Director. I believe the three of them are going to do, and maybe not Pete, and Roger Price.
You're going to put them in work in 10 seconds after it's approved, huh?
Well, you know, it's no time like the present.
Dr. Clardy, could you give us a quick hello to some of the new faces in the audience? I feel like we approved some great contracts, and I don't think the rest of the board has had the privilege of meeting.
Absolutely. So one of the great hires that was just approved, and thank you to the board for approving it and trusting in our hiring process. We are proud to announce that Pete Grender will be the new Director of Finance. Pete. Also in attendance from our prior consent agenda, and a tremendous hire as our new Director of Secondary Education, Ms. Karen Stocks-Glover. And you'll see Chad right after me, so.
Well, welcome, but thank you, and it's nice to see you in person. So.
Absolutely.
Just need the presentation.
Tamara, you had it up on the screen and it disappeared. There we go.
There we go. All right. Good evening, all. I'm very excited to be able to come before you today with a tremendous team, including myself, our new Assistant Superintendent for Business Services, Mr. Chad Weezy, and you all know Mr. Roger Price, who has been a tremendous asset to the Verona Area School District. We're here today to present the budget in its current state. This is not a day will it be finalized for a vote, but definitely some tremendous updates on some of the decisions for the current budget for the 21-22 school year. As well, during the presentation, we will do a pivot and go into some of the newer ways of working that we would like to present to the board of how we will present budgets moving into the future. So kind of a twofold presentation today. I definitely want to thank you, our board, for this opportunity, and also give a tremendous amount of gratitude and thanks to Dr. Dean Gurrell and Roger for the solid fiscal management over the years and providing VSD with a great budget to work from and be able to service our students. It's not an easy measure to have a strong budget, and Dr. Gurrell has been excellent in making sure that the transition to new leadership, but also the students who will benefit from our budget have the resources to work with. So thank you, Dr. Gurrell, for that tremendous work.
You're welcome.
With everything we do, we want to make sure that we are aligned to our pillars. Our pillars were approved by your board and are invested by our staff and our community. And we want to make sure that each decision that we make are clearly aligned to the pillars that have been established as far as strategic framework. In thinking of today, we are really going to be heavily focused on Pillar 5, which is the equitable allocation of resources. One of the most important things to talk about when you think about equitable allocation of resources is that equitable is not equal. Equitable allows for us to use our resources based on student need and is used by a data-informed process, and provides transparency throughout the process. We want to make sure that we are really using data both in qualitative and quantitative forms and sets to understand how our resources are supporting student outcomes and be able to move forward to a process of measuring those outcomes in a way that we can report to our community that we are meeting our goals or maybe need some additional resources to support those goals. Everything we do can and will always be grounded in our equity framework. As you can see in the center, that every student must be successful. That also means holding true to our values, that we are empowering our partnerships, that we are engaging with our engagement and expectations, and that we ensure excellence. For foremost, we want to make sure that equity maintains at the center and utilize those equity in all of our decision making. So the outcomes for today, when I say the outcomes, I'm gonna put my old teacher hat back on. If you leave today and these bullets that you see in front of you or in your computer are not clear, then our presentation hasn't been clear. So we want to make sure that our outcomes that you see come to life, and those are the ones you can come back with and address us with questions if you're not clear on the outcomes that we presented for you today. So at the end of the presentation today, you should walk away with the understanding of our current summary of equity-based recommendations, and an update around ESSER, and a timeline for the final budget in its full form. From there, you'll kind of get a hard pause, and we'll move into our future budget process preview. We do have a transition in leadership, so it'll just be a different style of how the budget will be presented to you. With that, I hope you walk away with a way of understanding, our shared understanding of how that will come to life, and the process for that timeline of the future budgeting process in its preview form. So I'm begin with Roger. Roger's been, again, crucial with the current budget. So we will talk about how do we get to this current state of the budget process, mostly with Roger and Dean and that team. We'll move into Chad and talk about the ESSER process, and then into our future considerations as we talk about the transition in leadership and our new ways of working in establishing a budget in the future.
Good evening. It's with pleasure that you, and I have great hope, because Pete has been the partner, your new finance director, in the technical side of developing the budget, working with Forecast 5 over the past number of years. He's been critical to taking what we have discussed as administration, as a board, as a district, and moving that into the actual numbers that we have that makes up the total budget. So the transition will be seamless there. In fact, we're scheduled tomorrow to actually continue our process and continue our work in his current role as we look forward to the future role. But my purpose here is to update you now on where the budget is and some of the things that have happened over the past number of months. That cumulative becomes that total amount that gets approved on June 21st as the preliminary budget, realizing that the final budget doesn't get approved till October. There's an update in late July for the annual meeting. So this is part of that process as well. So to go through this slide, talk about the leadership design has been incorporated within the preliminary budget as we had approved by the board. The wage increases that were included again are as part of what we've discussed previously. The safety and security initiative has been included within this our budget to date as well. The equity-based recommendations, I'll review those items in a few minutes. It's in a summary form. We'll talk about the use of ESSER funds. I'll do a lead into that and then turn it over to Chad to talk about the process going forward and how that can be utilized to best serve the district. The bottom line for fund balance and use of that is we're recommending, or the process to date has been to recommend a balanced budget, really leaving the flexibility in what could happen or could be needs for those one-time items going forward to the new process and in the transition to the new leadership team working with the board. So at this point in time, it's the intention to present a balanced budget that highlights the cost to continue and adds those things that we'll highlight tonight as well. We've included, as we mentioned before, base school fees. There's still some work that needs to be done in that area, but we do anticipate one fee as a general materials fee at all levels. And then, of course, really can't get into the tax levy target until more, and that doesn't come until this fall. So some general discussions could be warranted this summer as you go through some retreat or some discussions. But for now, I leave it out there as an item that needs further discussion. So this slide represents the results of a process that we've gone through the past number of months, working with our building principals, working with our central office administrative team to accumulate a number of requests and needs based upon the equity framework. And then those have gone through a process of discussion, deliberations within the central office team, and come to the conclusions at this point that these are the best items to bring forward and can fit within that goal of a balanced budget at this point in time. And those include are listed here, both site-based investments and district-wide investments. And we have a backup document. If we could go to the pillar summary document, please. We started this process last year to link what we're doing and thinking about in the use of resources and tying it to the equity framework, but also to understand that we support the other four pillars in different ways through our discussions and our decisions and the deliberations that take place related to the use of those resources. And this chart is an an update of where we are for this year, going for 21-22, as we're thinking and moving forward, and has been expanded to include a description of what is included in those, a fiscal impact, whether or not it's new, a continuation, or an enhancement, and then again, what major parts of the strategic plan it affects and helps with making those things happen. So just kind of walk through that a little bit. You know, for example, I already talked about the leadership structure. That's included, obviously, as an update of the design, and it has been approved and included within the budget. Staff compensation is ongoing. It's part of our deliberations as we prepare for discussions and negotiations with the teachers and the other employee groups. Safety and security. Again, this puts a descriptor and a dollar amount to those items. One-to-one technology is a continuation where the lease program for iPads, Amy and her staff have done a great job. That number was projected at 600,000 way back when, but the 5-year lease is at the 472 number on a continuing basis. And then there are some new things that you haven't seen or been involved with in the discussions, but are included with our initiatives or investments this coming year related to the equity framework. And that's the student services, the nursing and health office, particularly as it relates to dealing with the pandemic and issues related to our staff and students and bridging to the community. Some of the library services plan that was presented a couple of years ago are included within this recommendation to continue to drive access and enhance that access in our libraries and our schools. Charter requests and some specific requests for materials related to the charters are included as well. I believe and have passed on to Dr. Clarity that there's continuing discussions that need to happen related to the resources and how you balance the investment in every student that is a Verona School District student with the independence and drive and goals of the charters. So there's some discussion that needs to take place over the next immediate future year or so to talk about through that and figure out how that best can fit within the total budget of the district. We've included bilingual and ESL teaching staff, continuation of the AVID program, continuation of the expansion of the world language program. We've included curriculum, as I mentioned, the curriculum materials for charters, particularly as this last year we've not had fundraisers. We've discouraged the idea of reaching into the community at this time during the pandemic to take additional funds in. And so there's a gap there, there's a delta that was requested that we help finance, and that's included in this initiative on a one-year basis. Again, leading in those discussions related to how charters fit within the school district as a whole and independently. Some resources within the elementary and middle school level. And then I jumped over the fourth one, or the one right in the middle of the page, staffing based on student enrollment growth. We originally had asked the building principals to work within the same staffing level that they had this year for next year. Knowing that, as they build their schedule, as they build and look at the number of enrollments that they have and students that have had course requests, that we may have to make some adjustments. And this is an ongoing process. At the time I put this together, we were dealing with that about 350,000 in new staffing based upon enrollment. That's fluctuated a little bit as middle schools have tweaked their schedule and checked with workload and those kind of things. So that will be a factor that continues to evolve over the next month or so. So those items that we have included within the budget, and we have allowed and are expected we maybe some questions over the next few weeks leading to that final preliminary budget. So in June. So we go back to the slide presentation, please. Should mention also The world language doesn't only just affect the high school, it also has a middle school factor. Those requests are built into the enrollment. Didn't get classified correctly, but they are in there as part of what we are supporting with this budget. So then I'm just going to move in for a second. We've included some dollars. You saw that the $1 million item that we've identified for use of ESSER, particularly as it relates to learning recovery. It's really envisioned at this point, and this is early in the process, to talk, how best to utilize those funds that have become available to the district for those one-time activities as they were intended and as they best benefit the Verona School District, area school district. And to put it in focus at this point and then expand on that, I'll turn it over to Chad in just a second, but it's really focused on that learning recovery. The plan needs to be developed as to what that looks like and how best to use those resources, and that will be down the road. There are some things that are not covered under technology items that are not covered under specific grant programs that may draw on the ESSER funds as well. As I mentioned before, we've very much included the expectation that nursing services will need to be at the level they are now, or even at a higher level going forward in the next year or two. And that's, again, another use of ESSER funds and federal monies. And then fourthly, just, there's certain requirements that you wouldn't, in expenses you wouldn't have if you didn't have the situation we have, or the requirements under federal and state laws for employee leaves and expenses related to directives that impact that area. So those are the things that we thought about initially going through the process. I think it's critical to think about the next steps and the process that go through related to, again, the use of federal funds. With that, I'll turn it over to Chad.
Good evening, everyone.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. My name's Chad Weezy. I am the newly, as of last week, hired Assistant Superintendent for Business Services. I wanted to start by thanking all of you for this opportunity. Certainly thank Dr. Gurrell and all of the administrative team that has welcomed me so warmly. It's great to be here. It's an honor to be in this position. A little bit about myself. I'm coming from the Madison School District, where I was a 23-year educator there. A little unique in terms of my path to being in charge of business services. So I was a science teacher for 7 years at Madison East High School, hired by Milton McPike, one of his last years at East High School. From there, I went to La Follette High School, where I was a dean of students and assistant principal and the head football coach, and eventually became the head principal at La Follette High School. At that time, and all the way back to my teaching days, I continued to push on the district to make sure I had what I needed in my classroom, had what I needed at La Follette High School to support all my kids. And finally, the superintendent at the time, Dr. Cheatham, kind of said, put your money where your mouth is, come to the other side, and show us how the service industry, business services, building services, food services, can indeed provide a service for those service-oriented classroom teachers. And that's what I've done for the last 5 years in Madison, and it's kind of what brought me here. So really excited to be here, excited to work with Dr. Clarity and his team. Tonight we're here to talk about the budget, but you will hear from me again on all things transportation services, food services, and like I said, excited to lead a service organization serving a service organization. So it's wonderful to be here. Tonight, I'm just going to do a quick update on all things ESSER. And the big idea here is Roger gave you a sneak preview in terms of kind of what has been spent or allocated. And we've got a lot of opportunity in front of us. So to Dr. Clarity's point earlier, we feel very fortunate to be inheriting a balanced budget, a district that does have resources to serve our students, but we're also excited to move forward with potentially some new ways of thinking around tying student achievement results to those resources in a more explicit way. So here's a quick snapshot of what's ahead of us. So again, ESSER 1 is kind of out the door and has been spent and allocated. Credit to Roger and his team and Dr. Gurrell for the work they did in the middle of a pandemic to get that pushed across. I lived a parallel path to the one all of you did over the last year. So bless your heart for getting us to this point and getting close to the end of the school year. Ahead of us, we've got ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. So we've got about $1.4 million ahead of us in ESSER 2. Roger mentioned the fact that some of that is baked into what we are going to recommend for the budget here by the time we get to July. And then ESSER 3 is still a little bit more nebulous in terms of when we're going to see an exact dollar figure and what all will entail into actually receiving those funds and spending them. But we've got lots of time. So that doesn't have to be spent until 2024. It's a blessing in terms of a transition for Dr. Clarity to likely be able to implement many of his teacher-based, student-based ideas around student growth. To have a little bit of flexibility in terms of one-time funding is an absolute blessing at this time. Next slide. So again, I believe the board has seen this slide before, but we wanted to refresh it one more time because some of the things we can do with ESSER 2 funding are connected to ESSER 1. So ESSER 1, all things in ESSER 2 exist in ESSER 1. So the ESSER program again was the coronavirus aid package that came from our federal government. A lot of the distribution was tied to your Title I formula, and that's where we got those numbers. Allowable uses in ESSER 1, and then again, we can stack a few more things on in terms of ESSER 2, would prepare and respond to COVID-19, outreach services for special populations, addressing long-term closures, and I'm praying we're getting to the end of that. Roger already mentioned the use of educational technology, mental health supports, addressing after school and summer activities, and continued staff employment. So all of those things are in play for ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. Next slide. Quick bit on ESSER 2 and where that $1.4 million number came from. So again, it's tied to your title formula, and that federal law essentially said 90% of how they ended up divvying up the total amount headed to the state of Wisconsin came from that formula. The Joint Finance Committee still kind of playing around with what's going to happen with that last 10%, likely tied to in-person instructional hours by the time it's all done. We'll certainly update the board as we find more information there. That's why that plus question mark does exist. Next slide. So again, a few extra things that have been tacked on to ESSER 2 as approved ways that you could spend this money down. And there's a few of them in here that we certainly think will tie to the school improvement process Dr. Clarity is going to talk us through. So one is just addressing learning loss among students. And as a former classroom teacher, I can tell you that that comes from one of three things: how we're addressing that kid, what's happening with the content, and professional growth of that teacher. It only happens in three places. And we believe it's an absolute blessing to have funding available to take on that work. We can, if we need to, take care of some facility repairs. The Verona Area School District's in pretty sound shape there. I got the business from Dr. Gurrell when I interviewed here that Madison recently passed a $317 million referendum. And immediately put Dr. Gurrell and the hard work that they did for the Verona Area School District maybe down just a notch in Dane County for the amazing taxpayer support that happened here. So I think our facilities are in fairly sound shape, but that would be in play. And again, facilities are a great place to spend one-time funding. That it's hard to say, we need another English teacher at the high school, take it out of ESSER funds. That's easy in the short term. In the long term, you create a budget cliff that all of a sudden you have to account for that in your annual budget. And then lastly, other activities that are that are just necessary to maintain the operation and the continuity of services in our school district, like employing existing staff and so forth. Next slide. So as Dr. Clarity mentioned, we do want to take, I don't know if it's a super hard left, but a left-hand turn to kind of just foreshadow what it's going to be like to work with the two of us. Certainly available tonight to answer some questions. But these were the guiding principles that I used when I interviewed to become a member of Dr. Clarity's team. And I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe in the man. So I've known Dr. Clarity for a decade and was excited when this opportunity existed. This is kind of my core belief in terms of my way of working in terms of what's going to happen with allocations of resources for our students. So one, it's going to be, you can go back to me. It's going to be really important that we allocate the district resources in line with our core values, those 5 pillars, in particular pillar 5, and fully expect the school board to push us on our decision-making relative to that. If we can't find where these things land when we lay out a budget within those 5 pillars, you better send us back to the drawing board to at least figure out what's going on there. And like I said, in particular, pillar 5, what students are benefiting and what students are not benefiting from budget decisions we make. Next is my commitment to you that we will make multi-year, long-range moves when it comes to the budget. Just as I mentioned, I wouldn't be doing my job if we said, yep, we need another English teacher, take it out of ESSER and we'll figure it out 2 years down the road. So that's going to be really important. Also my job to make sure that we minimize distractions. And what that means is we have to get into a budget cycle, an annual budget cycle, that the school board is not surprised by things. And it allows you to work very closely with Dr. Clarity and the instructional side of the house to make sure that the budget stuff's not a distraction, it's supporting the work. Doing service for those teachers doing the most important work in our district. Tied to that, no surprises, so make sure that we have a budget overview very early. Likely early this fall, we'll already start to talk about what's going on with enrollment numbers and what the early budget's going to look like as we start to get into the allocation and workbook season. And lastly, and you heard Dr. Clarity say this in his opening comments, build on practices informed by student data. And that's the budget says a lot about what you value in terms of your students and your data, and they better talk to each other. Next. All right, so lastly, here's just at least my recommended initial path in terms of what's going to happen with the budget. We are really at the top of this constant cycle. So we are getting at about 10 o'clock here. We're presenting to the Board of Education. Again, thank you to Roger and Dr. Gurel for putting us in the spot to pass a balanced budget here in June. And then we will flip the script. We'll hit July and it'll already be Dr. Clarity and myself back talking to the board around what's going on with our strategic plan. You're going to hear about a school improvement process here shortly and how that is grounded in equity and having us continue to push each other on the budget decisions that will be coming in this annual cycle. As we move into late fall and into the winter, start to take a look at what's going on with state aid, the budget forecast. Hiring Pete will be an absolute blessing when that happens, and what's going on with our enrollment numbers. Get into winter and the spring, start to work with school-based staff around what's happening with FTE and what's happening with the budget workbooks. By the time we get there, those types of discussions should be happening with principals. Why here and not here? Why does this school have this and not this school? And start to have that dialogue with school-based staff around what their workbook's going to look like and who's going to be teaching what and how much of it. Then we get into salary, wages, and benefits discussion. I know the board's just been through that. Congratulations. And then we move into really what Roger just presented. Where might there be room for budget adds? And if you're having that conversation, you should also be talking about what have we been doing that's not working, that doesn't need to exist in the next budget. And then we rinse and repeat. And we are basically in constant dialogue with one another to make sure there's no surprises. And the resources we have in this district are really leveraged to the very best they can be. And I think that is it. So I talked to you a little bit about the how, and we're going to have Dr. Clarity close things out with the why. And then we're here tonight to answer questions. So again, thank you, everybody.
All right, what I'm going to need everybody to do is really just take a hard pause in your brain, because you just got our budget that was built by a previous administration, but also heavily supported, influenced by the incoming administration. And we believe that this is the right budget going 21, 22. And we truly, again, a lot of gratitude for the team that built this and what it went into, including a full cabinet of support. With that said, there's also going to be a transition of a future budget process that we want to preview with you tonight, so we understand how the newer administration will come in and do things different. And I want to be very, very clear, because we live in a society where people like to pit one thing against the other. Different does not mean one thing was wrong. There's just different leadership styles. So this will be a different style of how the budget is presented, and how the budget, how will we enact the budget within our system moving forward. So I just want to make that very, very clear. In my process, as from the time I was a candidate to the time I was selected to be the next superintendent of VASD, it's been a premise of leading with the why. So why are we doing this, and why are we doing it this way? The why for our budget process is very clear. The VASD budget is a reflection of our values and mission expressed in dollars and cents. And so if we believe in these values and we believe in these missions, which all of us do, then we better express it within our budget, and we better express it within the dollars and cents. So that is our why. When we get into the how, so how are we going to do this and make very strong equity-based decisions and have an equity-based decision process? The bullets that you see before you are step-by-step of how we will do that, and we want to make sure that you hold us accountable for doing each of these steps each time. So we'll get an initial proposal, whether it comes from central office or it comes from schools or just from input from our stakeholders. We will get a proposal of needs within our organization. That proposal has to be followed up with data, and data that indicates where possible inequities currently exist, who are the demographics that are being impacted by this, and what are the best practices that will support the shift based off data. So if we don't get anything right tonight, we've got to get number 3 right, or this whole thing falls apart. It will just completely fall apart. If we don't take the time, each and every time, to talk about the benefits and burdens, who will benefit and who are the people who are burdened by each budget decision, okay? We have to stay in that lane. And that is, some of you call it hard work. That's the hard work, because you have to be willing to do it each and every time and have some very, very tough conversations that are going to get uncomfortable. When we talk about specifically asking the question, who's going to benefit from this decision and who's going to be burdened by this position? And if we notice some trends one way or the other, calling it out and saying something about it, or having us as administrators that you trust to do this work, know that we have gone through this process and we are giving you very detailed responses about who's benefit and who's burdened by decisions. From there, we do an implementation of our plan. Our plan has to be realistic. It has to be funded. As we just said, it has to follow our beliefs. And it has to be a process that measures success with a continual feedback loop to both you, our board, and to our community. Within that, we're talking about a budget. We're fiscally responsible people. We owe a debt. We're stewards of this money. We have to be accountable. And so we have to monitor and communicate the results, understand our impacts and outcomes, and then continually work with our community in partnership so we can have investments and buy-in. And we can only do that if we have those continuous feedback loops that we said before. We have to understand why we're making decisions that we're making. So in essence, how we will invest in schools. And our investments in schools moving into next year will be in the form of school improvement plans. That is our goal for next year. When anybody says, what is Dr. Clary doing next year and the team doing next year? We are doing school improvement planning as our goal. With that, we will leverage staff voice through school-based leadership teams to inform the school improvement plans and to inform decisions moving forward. We will prioritize academic performance, and that's with the student emotional and physical health within the balanced budget. We can't look at it separately. It's academic performance, physical health, mental health, while balanced within this balanced budget. So our budget decisions will be linked to school improvement planning. Here's what school improvement planning is. At each school, we will set goals around academic and social emotional outcomes. Some examples of those being literacy, math, and sense of belonging. Those are goals for a school. The next step will be strategies. We will work with our school leaders to develop very explicit strategies and look at the first and second bullets. It has to be an intentional focus on closing disproportionate outcomes for focus groups. Please notice, for the sake of that language matters, I did not say subgroups. We don't have subgroups. We don't have groups that are lesser than in our community. We have focus groups. We have focus groups where we are focusing with intentionality on family students that may previously have not had the same outcomes as their peers. Those are focuses, it's not sub. We will invest in our staff professional development and professional learning, and we will leverage student voice to design strategies that actually impact student outcomes. Within this, we'll use metrics that are both quantitative and qualitative. I'll be very transparent. This year's budget was probably more based on qualitative because it was just necessary. We don't have as much quantitative given the circumstances of the year. But in a traditional sense, it would be really a balance of quantitative and qualitative data sets that tell a story around academics and culture and climate based off student, staff, voice. So this last slide before we take questions is really the things that, as it says, we want and expect to be held accountable. Okay? We want and expect to be held accountable. As you heard Chad say, like you heard Roger say before that, accountability aren't the very specific, minute details of which staff goes where and how. The accountability is, did we follow the equity process? Did we follow the process that we just presented to you? Did we back it up with the data? Did we show you the goal? Did we show you the strategy? Did we show you the metric? That's the accountability measure. The moment that we flip away from that and go into very specific details, we lose all the premise of why we're doing equity-based budgeting. So that's why I'm really asking that you hold us accountable for those areas and trust that we are able to provide those data around the goals, strategies, and metrics at presentations just like this. We'll utilize Forecast 5 for analysis of budget and academic results. I'm not doing a commercial for Forecast 5, I'm just telling you it works. I'm telling you that the information and the data that we're able to analyze and look at as compared to our resources that we're putting into it, they should match. And we should be able to show you that. And that company has, and we just so happen to have hired a finance director from Forecast 5. All right, so it's not a coincidence. It's part of the strategies of how we will do business. And finally, again, accountability between the BOE and superintendent. This is the type of budgeting process that I was hired to do. And then you task me with finding people and hiring people that could help execute this in this manner. We've done that. So hold me accountable to that standard, and we will provide you those 3 metrics or those 3 areas each time to show you that we are doing the work. Okay. In closing, know that we will continue and always be, along with you, a responsible steward of the community tax dollars. That is both ethical, professional, the way of doing business when you're talking about the superintendency and supporting our community. And we will be a steward of those community tax dollars in the appropriate way. So with that, I want to thank my two colleagues for joining me with the presentation, and we'll step back and take any questions, but thank you for indulgence, which I know is a little bit longer process today, but we really wanted to get across those two outcomes. 21-22, that budget, pause, how we move forward with the budgeting process moving forward. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. And before we jump into questions, I just want to thank Dr. Clarity, Dr. Guerrero, Chad, and Roger, and everyone who's worked on this presentation and this transition budget. I think, as you noted, Dr. Clarity, in the presentation, we'll be transitioning to a new style. And I think this is something that the board and the community has had in mind and has had, as a central focus in the strategic plan for years. And so I remember 3 years ago when we set that strategic plan, we set the goal of shaking up how we do business to get to a model where our decisions were based in equity. So I'm extremely thrilled to see the equity decision process, the use of goals and strategies and metrics, and just want to thank everybody involved, for making this a collaborative and smooth transition budget. But with that, I'll open up for questions from the board. Any questions, comments?
Yeah, but I didn't really want to go first because I'm new.
Jump on in.
Great. First of all, I'm a little bit kind of twitchy here, just being incredibly excited to be a part of this shift. I mean, just reading and really seeing potential for a lot of teeth into the equity work that we talked a lot about. Like you said, Noah, I'm glad to be in this spot, to be able to be in these dialogues with all of you and the great team that you seem to be bringing into the district. I think my question, or maybe just wondering, is kind of this nebulous space that we're in right now in this transition. And I'm kind of drawing on some of the keywords that you've shared around transparency and having staff dialogue. I'm feeling the transitional pinch right now in just discussions I'm hearing from a couple of sites in particular that I think are going to lose FTE allotment for next year. And I know that's going into weeds that you said we need to somewhat avoid, but how we navigate this transition and that transparency in this moment as we shift into next year and seeing how those decisions are being impacted by sites, by different allocations, by class sizes potentially at some of the sites that are losing enrollment. That's just a concern that I've heard shared. So, just surfacing that, especially again, because we're in this nebulous space.
Yeah, I think the best way to support that work is to really dig in and provide, you can use this actual slide deck of the equity-based process so they know what the process looks like moving forward. I think if we try to go backwards in it, should this be done this way, we'll again go down a rabbit hole. So here's the process. Here's where teacher voice clearly fits into this process, where we indicated it maybe 3 or 4 times during this presentation. And this is how you'll see this come to life. And this is the things that we are going to hold the superintendent and his cabinet responsible for, which are these very student-centered outcomes around the goal strategies and metrics. So, and just placing that in so they understand what is happening, because July 1 comes really fast. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I have a couple of questions. One of them is for Chad. I don't know if you want to have him come up or if you want to do it. It's up to you guys. So on slide 12, I don't know if anybody can find their way back to it. You talked about the ESSER 2 funds and how to use those one-time dollars. The third bullet point, your other activities. Can you talk more about that? I'm not following other activities that are necessary to maintain the operation of and continuity of services in local educational agencies and continuing to employ existing staff of the local education agency. There's a lot of jargon in there. I got a little lost.
It is. So this is essentially cut and paste from the DPI website. My take on ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 is these funding is incredibly flexible. We've elected to kind of pause and slow this down a little bit in terms of what we're doing in the Verona Area School District. but just coming from Madison last week, and that you can actually pull it up on madison.com. Some of the things they're doing with millions of dollars are so far outside the box in terms of like these innovation grants that I think if you can tie these things back to student learning and learning and recovery, and that's almost anything you can do in a school district, you're going to be fairly sound. It does require if you purchase services or if you purchase things, there's certain type of federal tracking that goes along with taking those funds and asset management that's aligned to it. But for the most part, this is a recoup of student learning, and some of the things that Dr. Clarity mentioned in terms of that school improvement process and getting that off the ground will certainly be applicable as we're looking for the next couple of years. So you're right, it's nebulous and kind of for a reason. I don't know if Roger, you had anything else to say.
Just an additional point is, an example was this year, we budgeted dollars for full-time subs. That was for the purpose of maintaining our operation of the district under unusual circumstances. Going forward, we've not included any excess costs over our norm for sub costs, but if there are specific to learning recovery or an operational piece, that's where those dollars could be utilized for that one-time output.
Okay, thank you. And my other question might be more general. I'm not sure who wants to take it. When you talk so much about using data to make your decisions, over the years that I've been on the board, it's been frustrating at times to not be able to identify or by number, by an easy number, how a staff member, for instance, has impacted their classroom. The things that teachers do in the classroom every day about building community may or may not be measurable on a piece of paper. And then when you compare that employee with another employee or looking for an outcome, sometimes those things are invisible. The same thing can be said for, our security teams. Say we bring on a security team, we do have some good data to support the efforts of the security team so far in the past couple of years. They've been very impressive. But sometimes there are things that are unseen because they don't happen. They didn't happen because we had security in place. And how do you measure the things that don't happen?
How do you measure things that don't happen? I think that you're talking about that from a culture and climate standpoint.
I think there's a lot of things that happen in the classroom that are not measurable by explicit data.
Gotcha.
And I've struggled with that over the years because we use data to make decisions, and that's sound and it's logical and it makes sense. And I get it, but I feel like there's a missed opportunity in missing things that are unquantifiable, but that we feel when we're in a building. And we might replace an old program with a new one, but that old program was holding down behavior maybe that we just didn't see anymore. So we don't need to fund that program anymore because that behavior isn't there. You take away the program and the behavior comes back.
Yeah, I mean, I think I understand what you're getting at. How do you measure the things that are not going to show up on an assessment, or how do you measure things that are not going to always show up on a staff survey? Because I think when I talked about the importance of quantitative and qualitative, that part of the scoring process system is also those systems of feedback, both from peer to peer with our staff and with our principals, where we're getting that feedback around not just staff performance, but also staff performance in a sense where they have this sense of self-worth in their profession and their self-worth in what they're doing. And sometimes it's actually asking the right question as well. You saw one of the bullets that I put up there was sense of belonging. That's not just for students. There's a sense of belonging for staff in our organization as well. So I think when you balance the quantitative piece with some additional evidence that's qualitative, that paints a broader picture of what's really happening in our schools And more importantly, what are our students experiencing and what are our staff experiencing? I think you get in trouble when you originally mentioned data, when that's only the thing that you look at is that final number and not look at the full context of what happened. We have to be in classrooms to do that. And we have to be there providing feedback, providing a trusted space where we can really continue to develop teachers. And not in this, we're not going to be a gotcha system. We're going to be a reinforcement and encouragement and developing great practitioners within our classroom. So that is data itself. So I think it's a commitment to looking farther than an assessment is the best way to answer that.
Yeah, and then my last question is really just about asking the right questions because it's elusive. I think over the years, we've done a good job of asking a lot of really great questions. And then there's also times where we've asked a question that missed the mark. And I know in my profession too, I ask our clients all the time, how did you feel about X, Y, or Z? And it's important to use the data that you get back. And we also assess the questions before we send them out to everybody. You know, we have a few clients answer the questions ahead of time so that we understand that they understood the question so that it's clear to them. And I think in the past and I know it's not perfect and I'm not criticizing our current administration by any means, but it's tricky to get the right question. And so my caution is just that we have to be careful when we ask questions that people understand what we're asking.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. It's also time for me to uplift one of the strategies that actually I did when I onboarded with you and all of our board members. And I used the empathy interview method because that empathy interview is not, it really doesn't matter. My question is the story that you tell me so that's what paints the picture. So that's why that was modeled with this team and reaching out to each of the board members so we can show you the type of interview process that will allow for our staff and students and parents to tell their truth and their story in their way, just with some very open-ended questions that don't guide you. If I say, what's your best experience, I'm gonna get your highlight. If I'm gonna get what's your worst day, I'm gonna get your low light. But if I just talk about, tell me about a day at Sugar Creek, that's your story. And that allows for that to come across more in a more authentic way. So that's one of the methodologies when I talk about qualitative interviews or qualitative data.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm going to piggyback off of Amy, some of your comments. And I'm just, and I don't necessarily expect a full answer to this, so it's more of a question for consideration. With the ESSER funds, I know sometimes it feels it's a good thing to get temporary funds in a crisis. It's also a challenge because you know that funding is not permanent. It's going to go away, and you have to be creative without falling prey to I'd really love to fund this wish list of things that I've always had prior to the crisis. And now I'd love to use this money for that, but that's really not necessarily a sound methodology to do that because the money's going to go away eventually. So that's my struggle as a board member. When I see lists of kind of what we've spent, maybe the past ESSER, the first round on, or what are we going to spend the next round on, is that temptation, right? That we not spend it on something that is more of a recurring cost, but also that we use it in the best way possible. So I guess my question is how much staff input, and when I mean staff, I mean more than just the administrative team, but like frontline employee input do we get when we get emergency funds like this? And I don't really have a feel for this in terms of the first round of ESSER, but even these future second, third rounds of ESSER, how much frontline employee input do we get about what could these emergency funds be used for that really would help in a crisis? Because one of the things I think is a strength about this district is the points about like school facility repairs, improvements to our environments to reduce virus transmission. I think that's one thing in our school district that I did not have a lot of worry about because our buildings are in excellent condition and knowing that we had good systems of air circulation and all of that. So it's less of that that's my worry, more of how are we in a crisis helping the frontline employee and making the environment the best for the interactions with students. And so I don't have a good feel for how much input we've gotten from our, frontline educators about use of ESSER funds.
Yeah, and that's why I immediately went to slide 17. Slide 17 talks about we will invest in schools. So it began with the overarching premise of school improvement plans, but the very second one below that, as you see, is we have to leverage staff voice to the school-based leadership teams. That is the intentional space where that happens. Or so we're talking about, you know, whether it's professional learning, whether it's resources, whether it's any amount of use, which you can see there's a plethora of things you can use for ESSER funds, but we have to have that staff voices as part of it, or else the school improvement plan itself won't be authentic because it is just based off a central office voice, and so it won't work that way. And so that is the space for that to happen, but also it needs to be cross-referenced within the school-based leadership teams, and all staff members should understand our equity-based allocation system and go through that process in each of those settings themselves. So as we're making decisions, hey, did we follow our process that we listed in front of you? Did we check for who's benefited, who's burdened? Did we check with all our focus groups to make sure that we are doing the equitable process? So I would say the school-based leadership team is the space for that. And then it's the execution of the equity plan as far as how that money is distributed.
I just wanted to echo what Noah said at the beginning about this is my gratitude to our current admin and our incoming administration. This is an incredibly challenging time to be, first of all, budgeting during a transition, an administrative transition, on top of this once in a lifetime emergency event that has so significantly affected learning. And just, I'm very grateful for the work that the current administration has done to get us to this point, for the new incoming administration carrying the torch forward so we can really benefit students. This is a huge lift, and this is big. And I appreciate all of the diligence that has gone into this. I also appreciate seeing the forecasting of how budgeting will look moving forward, so we can kind of get a sense of that as well. I think it's going to be a transition for everyone, and this is nice to see how this process will move. So I really appreciate that. And again, this is a big lift.
Yes.
And just very grateful for all of the work from all parties on this. So this is great for our kids, and we're very excited.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
I just had one question, and this is kind of a broad question, so I don't need it to take a whole lot of time. But I see whenever we have these sorts of systems that are this big and this all-encompassing, there's a kind of natural tension with the notion of innovation. Mm-hmm. That as things become too systematized, it's harder for individual acts of innovation to rise to the top and really make change. So I wonder if you could just speak about innovation a little bit and how you see that in this system.
That's why I think innovation lives in the form of our outreach, especially the most innovative people in our community are our children. And because both they are the ones that benefit, and they are the ones that have the foresight to understand things that we that have been in the system for quite a long time can get very accustomed to, that is just the way it should be done. And I don't remember which slide it was, I apologize, but when I talked about student voice is that type of forward thinking. Also, we have very innovative staff. I had a phenomenal presentation from a staff member at the high school today that some of the most innovative thinking that I thought. So there's always that space for that. And I think it comes with an assurance that there's a willingness to accept innovation as part of our growth as well. I don't think anyone gets into this business to uphold the status quo. And so with that in mind, we have to think of innovation in that way, but also have the structures where we can listen and get those new types of information.
And as a follow-up, and I'm sure that you thought of this, but if you could just maybe give voice a little bit to how you think about getting voices in the mix that might not be heard. Not everyone's going to be a type A that's going to come out and say, hey, I've got this really great idea. A lot of people, especially if you're talking about kids as innovators, a lot of kids may be beaten down, being told that they're not good enough. how do we get past that to get them to contribute their ideas?
Yeah, that fortunately has already started as part of, we intentionally did the student-based listening sessions, and as part of that, there's also a student advisory tutor superintendent that's being developed based off those voices. For me, there's also that, it has to be the intentionality that I look at to make sure that that team fully represents the demographics of our district, and that we're getting voices from, quite honestly, some voices that may not have been heard traditionally. And so it's not going to be, hey, the superintendent has this student advisory. It is intentionality of reaching out. I want you to be in this space. I need your voice in this space. Getting input from staff, family members around who would be able to function in that way. So that is a process that started with the student-based listening sessions that I think were about 3 weeks ago, but will carry over into the student advisory.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions or comments? All right, well, my last comment is just, I think, again, appreciate the perspective of asking the board to push you and the administration. I would say likewise, challenge the board. I think we're ready to make investments, strategic long-term investments to disrupt the status quo and invest in eliminating disparities and reducing barriers. So just to speak on behalf of the board and our commitment to the strategic plan, I think we're ready to take these big steps. So we appreciate the work that's gone on this presentation, and certainly looking forward to the future conversations.
We appreciate that. Thank you for being a captive audience and great questions. And again, thank you to this team and the dean and his team for bringing this presentation together. A lot of voices, a lot of spaces, and we're truly appreciative of the work that's been done.
So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, with that, we can move on to superintendent's report.
No report tonight.
Okay, thank you. We're on to future agenda items and meeting dates. Just as a reminder, we have our board retreat this Saturday at 8 a.m. Any questions or comments or thoughts on the future agenda items or meeting dates? All right, we can move on to committee reports.
You know what? I'm sorry. I wanted to interrupt just real quick. So, and just make sure that board members have gotten back to Tamara about graduation. So it's not technically a board meeting, but it's a board event. So I assume everyone has, but I'm always the last one to do it. So
No, appreciate that reminder. Excellent. Any other questions, comments, thoughts on future agenda items or meeting dates? All right, committee reports, CIA.
So we have another CIA meeting coming up, and I believe I shared it with the new members so that everyone knows about it, but it's May 26th at 9. So yeah, I think I shared it with both new people, and all board members should, be welcome to attend that Zoom meeting at 9 a.m. on the 26th.
Excellent. And yeah, that's a great point. And I'll just, again, request from staff who are organizing the committee meetings, if we could have every board member invited to every committee meeting from here on out as we kind of adjust and board members try out different committees. And then we'll obviously return back to a conversation around committee structures and assignments. So finance, BG&T?
Has not met.
Thank you. Personnel and policy?
Has not met.
All right, and with that, I would accept a motion to adjourn.
Well, it's not 10 o'clock. Are we sure?
Yeah, are we allowed to adjourn?
Noah, can I ask one question?
Absolutely.
Yana, you weren't here for me to ask, but did you want to be sworn in officially during a meeting, or do you want me to do that afterwards? Because we did not officially swear you in, so I have the documents here that I'm supposed to have you repeat if you want to do that officially or after the meeting.
It doesn't matter.
I think we should do it. We have time. It's too early to quit.
It doesn't matter. I'm open, but I don't want, I can do it after if people want to go ahead and go.
No,
But I also know that
we'll do it right now.
you all owe us 3 hours, so I can do it now.
We'll do that right now.
All right, works for me.
Would I just need to ask her. I don't care.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm just going to ask that you repeat after me so that we can swear you in. I, Kalyana Williams,
I, Kalyana Williams,
having been elected or appointed to the office of, I should say elected, to the office of Verona Area School Board Member at Large,
having been elected to the office of Verona Area School Board Member at Large,
swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States
swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Wisconsin,
and the Constitution of the State of Wisconsin,
and will faithfully and impartially discharge the duties
and will faithfully and impartially discharge the duties
of said office to the best of my ability.
to said office to the best of my ability.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Thank you, Christina, and congratulations, Yana.
Thank you.
And with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
There's been a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you all very much.